Hello, I'm Jeff Cavins. On this installment of our teaching about the Rabbi and the Disciple celebrating the Year of Faith, I want to talk to you a little bit about how the early disciples actually became disciples of the Lord. You know, sometimes in the modern era we think back about a rabbi and his disciples and we get it, but oftentimes we don't really think about what that actually meant. So I'd like to bring you back for a moment to 2,000 years ago, to the life of Jesus and what he most likely went through as he grew up in Nazareth. The idea of a rabbi was very popular 2,000 years ago, and a rabbi was a very prestigious thing to be. A rabbi was a teacher, a mentor, someone who could not only expound the law of Moses, but somebody that you would want to emulate. Jesus was a rabbi, and it was that rabbi who chose his disciples 2,000 years ago that changed the world and turned it completely upside down. Back then, during Jesus' time, there were a number of rabbis traveling around the country, and many of them did have disciples. Some had 5, some had 7, some 11, even Hillel had 70. But to become a disciple of a rabbi was a process. Let me take you back for a moment. When a young boy grew up in Nazareth or anywhere around Israel 2,000 years ago, from the ages of roughly 4 to 10, that young boy would enter what was called the Beit Sefer, the house of the book. And he would go to the local synagogue, and a teacher would begin to teach that young boy the Torah, the first 5 books of Moses. And not only did they learn the teachings of Moses, but they memorized great amounts. It was in the 4th century that St. Jerome said, as he was in Bethlehem, that he hardly ever ran across a young Jewish boy who hadn't committed the entire Torah to memory. It was the way they learned. It was the way they passed on the faith. So from 4 to 10, you would memorize the Bible. That's what Jesus did. And then from 10 to 14, you would enter into the next phase of your education, called the Beit Talmud. In the Beit Talmud, you would expound on the law of Moses, and you would learn more books of the Hebrew Scriptures and memorize the prophets and go on and start learning about the oral law. At the same time, you would learn your father's trade. If your dad was a fisherman or if he was a carpenter, he would teach you how to do that particular trade. And so from 10 to about 14 years of age, they would go through this schooling, and it was marked by a Q&A period, questions and answers. The rabbi would come to the young students and ask them questions, and the students would reply to demonstrate that they understood what the rabbi was teaching. Remember Jesus when he was found in the temple? How old was he? He was this age. He was 12 years old, and what was he doing? He was answering and asking questions. He was involved in learning, and he was involved in teaching. He was thoroughly a part of this school, this Beit Talmud. Well, by the time that you were 13 or 14, you would end this phase of your education, and at that point you had to make a decision. Did you want to be a disciple of a great rabbi? If you did, you had to ask. And you would go to your rabbi and say, "Rabbi, I want to be your disciple." And then the rabbi would begin to question you and ask you questions to see if you had what it took to not just become a disciple, but to become like him, to become like the rabbi. So the rabbi would grill you with questions, and he may ask, "What's 2 plus 2?" And you wouldn't answer 4. You'd answer, "What's 8 minus 4?" Or "What's the square root of 4?" You would or square root of 16. You would ask all kinds of questions. And you would give all kinds of answers demonstrating that you knew the material. And the rabbi had to make a decision. The decision was, do you have what it takes to become like me? Do you see the world the way I see the world? And if he thought you did, he would say to you, "Lech acharai," come follow me. Which meant that you are going to take that rabbi's yoke upon yourself, his worldview, and you're going to leave everything and follow the rabbi. When he taught, you listened. When he demonstrated, you watched. When he gave you assignments, you obeyed. And you set out on a life of becoming like your rabbi. Jesus was a rabbi. And he chose 12 men. And notice those 12 men were doing what? They were doing their father's trade. When the rabbi would say, Lech acharai, come follow me, he'd either say that or he'd say, go do what your father taught you. Go be the fisherman, because you're not going to be my disciple. And when Jesus meets these men, what do we see? They're doing their father's trade. It means they weren't chosen by a great rabbi, but Jesus chose them. He chose them because he knew that they had what it took to become like him, but only with his help. God has chosen you to come follow him. But for you to become like him, you're going to have to walk with him. You're going to have to spend every day with him, and you're going to have to submit to his teaching and give in to his power to change your own heart. And that's what he has for you. And just like the first evangelization, the world was turned upside down by disciples, not fans. The second evangelization, the new evangelization, is the same. We're going to change the world, not by being fans, but by being disciples. And that takes a decision. Do you want to be a disciple of Jesus? In our next segment, I'm going to continue to talk about this relationship, and I want to challenge you with what I would call a Starbucks decision about following Jesus.